My daughter Lily and I are both nature enthusiasts. I promised her that I'd take her on a trip if she got good grades. I knew she was a straight A student though, so it was really just a formality. I knew I would have to take her. To be honest, I think I wanted to go even more than she did. We were excited to spend the weekend in a remote area, surrounded by the beauty of the Appalachian Mountains. We rented a small cabin on Airbnb. It was perfect, with a wraparound porch that offered stunning views of the surrounding landscape. Inside it was cozy and rustic, with wooden walls, a large stone fireplace, and comfortable furniture. There was only a single room, with a bedroom nook in the far corner, and a large sofa in the middle of the room. It was perfect for the two of us. The first day was great. We arrived early in the morning and met the owner, an older man named Rich. He was probably around 55 or 60, tall and muscular, but also overweight. We spent the rest of the day hiking, exploring the woods, and talking about random stuff. But on the next night, things took a turn for the worse. Lily and I were on the couch in front of the fireplace. I was reading a book, and Lily was listening to her iPod. I heard a knock at the door. I was confused at first. I didn't know who could be knocking at this hour. Lily looked at me, and I could tell she was scared. I tried to hide how scared I was. I got up and walked to the door. There was a small window there, and I peered out. I could see the owner Rich standing on the porch. I was really creeped out right away. It was 10 p.m., and it was already dark. I felt really vulnerable alone out there, and I didn't know that man very well. When I looked out the window, Rich saw me, so I felt pressured to answer it. I opened the door.
"Hi there."
Rich said.
"I'm sorry to bother you, but I was hiking in the area."
I didn't like his sudden appearance, and his story seemed too convenient, but I tried to be polite. Before I knew it, he walked in and stood in the entrance, and then he closed the door. We talked for several minutes. The conversation was really awkward. I was giving off every sign that I was uncomfortable, but he just wouldn't pick up on the hint. Rich looked at me in a really creepy way, but I tried to stay calm. Lily was sitting on the other end of the room, looking over at us once in a while. As time went on, I told Rich that I was going to call it a night soon, a clear hint for him to go, but he refused to leave. He made himself at home, even helping himself to some of our food and drinks, and telling us stories about his life. I tried to be polite, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of discomfort that lingered in the air. Lily too seemed uneasy, and I could tell she wanted him to leave as much as I did. After an hour passed, Rich's behavior became more erratic. He started pacing around the cabin, muttering to himself and looking out the window. I felt trapped, alone in the woods with a strange man who refused to leave. I finally asked him to go directly, but when I did that, he got angry and started shouting at me, telling me that he wasn't going anywhere. My heart was racing, and I could feel panic rising in my chest. I knew I had to do something to protect Lily and myself. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call for help, but like I knew, there was no service in the area. We were completely cut off from the outside world, alone with a stranger who was becoming more and more unstable. Eventually, I told Rich that if he didn't leave, I was going to call the police. When I said that, he grabbed his backpack and stormed out the front door, slamming it behind him. I was still really worried that he was going to come back. I locked all the doors and windows, and then put Lily to bed. I stayed up all night listening to the sounds of the woods and waiting for Rich to return. The next morning, Lily and I packed our bags and left the cabin, never to return again. The whole experience left a deep impression on us, and I felt lucky that we made it out alive. Looking back, I realized that we had taken a risk by staying in such a remote location without any way to call for help in the case of an emergency. But we learned a valuable lesson about the importance of being prepared and staying safe, even in the most beautiful and serene locations. When we got home, I called Airbnb customer service to report what happened. They were apologetic and promised to take action against the owner for entering the property without permission. I also left a negative review on the website, warning other travelers about what that guy did. This happened last summer with a group of my friends from college. One of my best friends was getting married, and we all decided to go together. It was me, my friend Brad and his girlfriend Rachel, and our other friends Jesse and Ben. We rented an Airbnb for the weekend. It was a 4-bedroom house that was not too much to brag about. It was the cheapest way for the 4 of us to stay together and have our own rooms. The neighborhood was not the best. The roads were in bad shape, and there was trash all over the place. It was one of those parts of the city that seems to get neglected. We didn't mind, though, because we weren't there for the accommodations. The wedding was lovely, as weddings are. After the reception ended, it was around 2 a.m. We piled into the car and drove back to the house. I was the designated driver, and I was the only one who wasn't drunk. When we got there, we noticed that the front door was slightly open. On closer inspection, we could tell that it had been forced open. The lock was broken, and there was also some damage to the door. It looked like it had been kicked in. We knew right away that there had been a break-in. Before I could react, my drunk friends rushed into the house to check if their stuff was safe. We had all brought our laptops, and most of us had important stuff on there. In my sober state of mind, I knew it was a bad idea to rush in, but it was too late for that. They were already in there. I went to my room to check what the damage was. When I got there, the lights were off. I flicked on the light switch, and when I did, I was met by a strange man standing in the middle of the room. He was holding a knife. It looked like one of the large knives from the kitchen. We stood there staring at each other for a few long seconds, and then out of nowhere, the man rushed towards me. I slammed the door shut and held it closed with all my strength, and I called for my friends to help. They came running, and together, we held the door shut as the man on the other side pushed back, trying to force his way out. One of my friends quickly dialed 911, and we waited there, holding the door closed. As we held it shut, I could hear the man on the other side muttering to himself. It was clear that he was unstable. He kept pushing, but we held firm, and my friends and I were taking turns to make sure the door was kept closed while we waited for the police. Finally, after what seemed like a really long time, we saw the police car pull up in front of the house. Jesse went to let them in. After a tense standoff, the police were able to apprehend the man and take him into custody. After they secured the scene, we were able to search the house to see what had been taken. To our relief, we found that nothing had been stolen, and it appeared the man had simply broken in and then waited in the bedroom. That raised all kinds of questions, though. If he wasn't there to rob us, then why was he there? We were shaken, but grateful that we managed to stay safe and that nothing was stolen. The rest of the night was a blur of activity, with police interviews and gathering evidence. We were all exhausted, but relieved to have made it through the ordeal. The next day, we packed up our things and said good riddance to that place. We were grateful to be headed home and away from the memories of that terrible night. I've been listening to some scary Airbnb stories, and I thought I would share this one that happened to me. I have a house near the downtown part of my city. It's semi-detached, so it's attached to my neighbor on one side. There's a small backyard and an even smaller front yard. I lived there by myself at the time, and this was about 6 years ago. I was planning to visit my parents for the weekend in the summer. They live in a small town in Michigan, and I live in Tennessee. I was excited to spend some time with them and relax a bit. I thought it would be a good idea to rent out my house while I was gone, just to make some extra money. After I posted it on Airbnb, I received several inquiries from potential renters. I was looking for a responsible and trustworthy family to rent my house, so I carefully read through each message. I set my price pretty low so I'd be able to choose carefully. One stood out to me. It was from a young family who claimed they were coming to town to visit some friends. They had some positive reviews from previous Airbnb stays, so I felt confident that they would take good care of my home. I communicated with the renters through Airbnb, and we worked everything out that way. It was my first time, so I was really figuring it out as I went along. I left a key in a lockbox and told them to text me if they needed anything. I felt comfortable with the arrangement and headed off to Michigan to visit my parents. On the second night of my trip, I received a text message from one of my neighbors, Blake, who lived across the street. He told me there was a wild party going on at my house and that he was worried. Blake said that he was about to call the police, but he wanted to give me a heads up first. We were somewhat friendly, but I didn't tell him that I was going to be out of town. I was shocked and horrified. I asked Blake to go ahead and call the police. I felt helpless and frustrated. I was hundreds of miles away, and there was nothing I could do to stop the party or protect my property. I texted Blake to keep me updated, but I didn't hear back from him for several hours. I tried to call him, but he didn't answer his phone. It was late by then, so he must have gone to bed. I was really worried for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep at all and felt sick to my stomach. I kept imagining the worst case scenario, my furniture being destroyed, my belongings being stolen. I felt violated and angry. How could someone do this to my home? The next morning, I called Blake again. He finally answered, and he told me that the party had been loud and wild. He said there were dozens of people in my house, and they were still there when he woke up in the morning. He also told me that the police had come, but they didn't break up the party, they just made them turn down the music. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wanted to fly back home immediately, but my parents begged me to stay. For reasons that I won't get into here, I decided to stay with my parents for the rest of the week. When I finally returned home, I was shocked by the state of my house. It was an absolute disaster. The walls were covered with graffiti, the floors were covered with broken glass, and the furniture was destroyed. I also noticed some of my things were gone. To name a few, they stole most of my towels and several kitchen appliances, including an expensive blender that I used almost every day. I spent the next few days cleaning up the mess and taking inventory of the items that had been stolen. It was a long and painful process. I had to replace several pieces of furniture and repair the walls and floors. It cost me over $10,000 in damage, and I was never fully reimbursed by Airbnb. I later heard that people will sometimes create fake accounts just to give each other positive reviews. That way a bad renter can have a decent-looking account and trick an unsuspecting person into renting to them. It only costs a few bucks in fees to make it look real. I think that's probably what happened to me. Fake reviews are everywhere these days. The whole experience left me traumatized and angry. I couldn't believe that someone could be so cruel and destructive. It took me a long time to trust people again, and I never rented out my house again either. It's just not worth the risk. This is about a bad experience that my boyfriend and I had last year. We had been planning a weekend trip in a nearby town. Both of us had used Airbnb in the past, and that's what we did this time as well. We wanted a quiet and affordable place to stay, and after some searching, we found a decent-looking room on Airbnb. We booked it without a second thought. The day of our trip arrived. We were both excited to get away from the city and relax for a few days. It was about a 3-hour drive, and we arrived at the house at around noon. The owner said he would meet us there to give us the keys. When we rolled up to the place, we were a little disappointed. The place looked a lot worse than it did in the pictures. We were greeted by the owner, who had a smile on his face, but a strange look in his eyes. He showed us around the house, and as soon as we walked in, we were hit with a strong odor. It was a musty smell. I'm not sure exactly what was causing it, but I think it was just what happens when a place is not cleaned very regularly. I wanted to leave right away, but I didn't have the nerve to say it. The owner showed us to our room. It was dimly lit and had a small window that overlooked the backyard, which was sparsely covered with grass. The bed was in the middle of the room, and there were stains on the sheets. The blanket was folded and placed on the end of the bed. The floors were sticky, and there were cobwebs in the corner of the room. My partner and I exchanged a worried look. This was not what we had expected. The owner must have noticed our disgust, because he quickly tried to reassure us that someone was coming in to clean the room. He said he had been having trouble finding a reliable cleaning service, and apologized for the inconvenience. As he was leaving, he told us that there were a few other guests staying in the house, and that we should feel free to use the common areas, including the kitchen and living room. However, as soon as he left, we began to notice even more red flags. The kitchen was a mess, with dirty dishes piled up in the sink and on the countertops. We saw a few cockroaches crawling around on the walls as well, and the fridge had a strong stench coming from it. The living room was equally uncleaned, with stained furniture and an overwhelming musty smell. After that, we had a quick discussion. We were on the same page. There was no way we were staying there. We got in our car and found a hotel room in town. It was at least double the price, but we had no choice. I would have preferred to drive all the way back home instead of staying at that place. There was no way. In the end, we had to pay for both the Airbnb and the hotel. It was a lesson learned, and we realized that we should be more careful when booking on Airbnb. The pictures looked decent, so there was really no way for us to know. Also, the place had no reviews at the time when we booked, but when we looked back, there were 3 negative reviews already. I guess we saw it just a little too early.